Hello, and thanks for listening to your SCAMLE's exclusive podcast, ExplorED. On these episodes, you will enjoy exclusive interviews with some names you recognize and some people you'll be meeting for the first time. In each of our episodes, we will ask you to think and grow and reflect as a professional educator. If you aren't yet a member of SCAMLE, we encourage you to join today. More information can be found at www.scamle.org. There, find out more information about membership, conferences, and professional development opportunities. And don't forget to join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. My name is Sarah Evanson Atkinson, and I serve as the Professional Development Director for your SCAMLE. I am an educator of 21 years and a past SCAMLE president as well. On this episode of the ExplorED podcast, I had the opportunity to speak with Jimmy Casas, an education consultant, lifelong educator, author of CultureEYES, and former keynoter and guest of SCAMLE's annual conference. So before we dive in, let's all take a moment and think back to your very first job interview for a position in education. For me, it was the year 2000 in Florida, and I attended a job fair for Volusia County Schools. Every interviewing principal had a limited number of interview slots, and I was selective. The schools I wanted were booked until 2 p.m. by the time I made it down to the high school aisle of tables. I was a college kid, not too much more than $5 in the bank, and I had packed my lunch in a brown bag, a ham sandwich and a bag of chips. I found a little secluded bit of concrete as a highly coveted spot of shade in which to dine. After a few minutes, a nice lady in a gorgeous silk suit joined me. We started to talk. After a while, she slipped and called me by my name. She asked me if I had ever thought about teaching middle school, and the rest was history. During our discussion, Mr. Casas urges us never to get too far away from that young, pre-service educator sitting in the chair, sharing our dreams, our hopes, and our plans for transforming a classroom full of young people. Please enjoy our candid conversation with Mr. Jimmy Casas.
So Jimmy Casas, we're here today. Thank you so much for joining me here today. So for those of you who don't know Jimmy, I don't know what kind of rock you've been living under, but so Jimmy, tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are and where you come from and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, born and raised in the state of Iowa, lived there all my life. Was an educator for 26 years. Started my career in Milwaukee Public Schools, working in the inner city. Started there as a classroom teacher. Took my first principalship at the age of 26. Served in that role for 22 years in 3 different school districts. Left the profession a little more than 4 years ago. I'd been doing some work for ICLE, which is the International Center for Leadership and Education. Loved it. And then realized that I think I could do this, right? I could do it out on my own and could do it maybe differently. And decided to start my own company then and continue to do that work. Love it. Passionate about it. Sure, it's a lot of time on the road, but if you love to travel, it's a great gig. Last year, I decided I love to dream and love to scheme and I love to make it happen. So started our own publishing company here with a partner of mine, Jeff Zoll, last year, and we now run ConnectEd Publishing, and we feel very blessed. We've now published here in the last year or so, approximately, I think, 7 or 8 books, and it looks like we have another 4 or 5 books in the works that we're doing, so to give other authors a voice and to get their work out and their story out in the world. So that's what I continue to do today, and feel just very blessed and very fortunate. My passion, even though I love speaking, as you well know, I love talking, doing keynotes, presentations, and workshops, but my real passion is coaching. I see myself as a teacher still, as a coach. I know how difficult the role is of a principal, and my passion is to support principals to become the best versions of themselves, because I know how difficult the job is. So that's what I've been up to lately.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate having you. So I'll jump right into it here. So what should educational leaders be focused on as they look to launch a new school year in the fall?
Yeah, one of the things we talk about all the time is that, and I'll be honest, so here's a mistake that I made early on. And I think what happens is right now, at least in my observation, just working with principals right now this summer, is they're a little stressed out about the start of the school year for obviously for obvious reasons, right? They want this to be a great kickoff. They know teachers are exhausted. They've just had the most difficult year. There's still a little anxiety in some areas, to be honest with you, parts of the country, depending on where you live, what the opening of school will look like. But what we're seeing is that they're stressed out. And one of the issues is that I continue to see is because they're still trying to figure it out by themselves, right? They're still trying to plan welcome backs and they want it to be great. But yet one of the things that I keep reminding them of is the factor that I made the mistake is that we're not taking the voices of others into consideration. Let's be honest. If we want to know what a great kickoff looks like, if we want to know what teachers want to have in order to have a great experience, then we need to be asking teachers. We should be bringing teachers to the table and saying, hey, here's what I want. And that's kind of the whole premise of, what I try to talk about and write about is the idea of culturalizing is to bring people together and to share a vision, but then ask for help, right? Use the eyes and the voices of others to help you build that, right? The collective efficacy to get other people to invest in it. Not to be compliant, but to be invested in the sense of, hey, if we were going to make this happen, what would that look like? What's really important to teachers? What do we want to make sure that we have during that welcome back? What should we try to avoid? So the strategy is to include the voices of others to get feedback. And what's really also really important to that is that we need to model that because we see the same thing happening in classrooms with teachers and kids is it's very compliant. We come, we tell them what to do, what they need, what it's going to look like. But how are we asking kids? Are we using their voice? Cultures that are excellent have a way to give everyone a voice in the organization. So that's right now what they should be thinking about in terms of how they prepare and plan for the upcoming school year.
So what do you say to a principal who says, it's collective efficacy is a great idea, but if I'm completely honest and transparent, I'm the principal, that should fall on me. What do you say to those principals who are even, who feel a little threatened almost by that idea of collective
I think they're in
efficacy?
trouble. And the reason I say that is because we know that leadership is not about a committee of one. If they're going to try to do this by themselves, they're going to be in trouble. And that's what's happening right now. It's everywhere I go. Same thing that happened to me. So here's the thing that we have to understand is that is a common mistake, in my opinion, that I'm seeing leaders do. They're trying to lead the organizations by themselves. It is my opinion, again, Sarah, I don't have a monopoly on this, but I have experience. I've been through it. I've made the mistake, and I work with hundreds of principals right now that continue to make that same mistake. In my opinion, our job is to build a community of leaders. One of the most effective practices that principals can do is to be strategic in making sure and intentional and encouraging, inviting, supporting, and hopefully inspiring others to want to lead with them. The idea is to build a community of leaders to help us lead the organization. Too many principals are trying to lead it by themselves, and that is not a good approach to use for many reasons, including the fact that you can't sustain that over a long period of time. And if you try to do that, you are going to kill yourself, right? I mean, it's either going to cost your health or it's going to cost your family. You can't just be trying to do everything. If we have that hesitancy and reluctancy, that is a question we have to ask ourselves, why? Why am I hesitant to turn that over? Now, let's say someone said, because Jimmy, I'm ultimately responsible for that, and I have to ensure that we do this right, as though somehow that we are the only ones that know how to do it right. We need to be strategic in making sure that we use the eyes of others, the experiences of others, the knowledge, the wisdom, to help us avoid the potential mistakes that we could avoid if we're not careful about that. But if people are hesitant, then we have to find out why they're hesitant. I'm not going to judge a principal for being hesitant. My guess is there's an experience there why they hesitate, right? And maybe they've had a bad experience, so therefore they're like, hey, you have to understand, I got in trouble, I got reprimanded, I let others, empowered others. But part of the issue of that also is to understand that maybe your process and how you empowered others was ineffective. It wasn't that you were trying to delegate or that you were trying to empower or build this community. It's the way you did it that was ineffective. I do give principals a lot of grace, to be honest with you, because I think we're asking them to do a lot. We're demanding a lot of them. It's changing more and more all the time. I think it's very difficult, especially in this day and age, to be a building or a campus leader, because I think there's so much scrutiny on the work that we do. We don't get a lot of passes anymore. And I do think people are a little heightened and a little concerned, right? And this last year certainly did not help when the whole world is judging everything you do as though somehow you're supposed to have the answers, and we don't. Well, if we don't, then that's even more reason why we need to make sure that we're working together, because we have to have everybody moving in the same direction, all hands on deck.
I've got to tell our membership here that I've really enjoyed reading Handle with Care, your latest. One question in my head that I had while I was reading was, I understand in my gut that this is timely and necessary and appropriate. And there's a part of me that's almost kind of sad, frustrated, disappointed that we're not past this idea of leading with integrity and demonstrating grace to everyone around us. What's the connection? Why do you think that your writing here is so timely? And why do we need this more than ever? And why shouldn't I maybe be so frustrated?
Well, a couple things. First of all, let's just kind of tell a quick story here. Whether it was you or whether it was me or any other educator, when we first went in the profession, we had a reason we wanted to go in the profession, right? There's a story there. For many people, it's because they had a great experience with a teacher who inspired them, that loved them, that believed in them. So they wanted to become a teacher because someone inspired them. We have people that want to become a teacher because, well, guess what? They didn't have a good school experience and they don't want other kids to have that experience. So they think, you know what? I understand difficult kids. I want to be someone who can help them. Others, let's just be honest, they just have a gift, Sarah. I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, these people can just have an ability to connect. They have an aura. Kids just flock to them, right? So whatever the reason was, the bottom line is there was a time that when we went into the profession, we couldn't wait to get started. We all sat in that interview chair. We all talked about how we wanted to make a difference, how we were going to connect with kids, how we were going to relate to kids, how we were going to get to know their stories, how we were going to be their champions, how we were never going to quit, that we thought we could inspire kids to be more and do more than they ever thought possible. And yet we look around all our campuses and we still have adults and educators behaving in ways that do not align with what they said when they sat in that interview chair, correct? Yeah. So here's my mindset. Then that convinces me that there isn't a single adult in this profession who doesn't want to be great. But I will tell you this, there are a lot of adults who have lost their way. So why have they lost their way? Well, let's talk about that. 1, they're exhausted. 2, they're frustrated. 3, they're not getting the results they wanted. 4, this isn't what they thought they signed up for. 5, they're working in buildings that are a little toxic. They don't feel a part of the community. They don't feel like they're making a difference. They're losing hope. The strategies they've learned aren't working. Whatever it is, they're slowly losing their way. Their passion is gone. They're not as energetic. They are now doubting. They're hesitating. They don't believe they can make a difference. People land where they land based on past experiences. So what I would say to you, and I would say to any building leader, don't take it personally. It's not about us. What we have to understand is, what were those experiences? What is the story? Why are people behaving the way they're behaving? I don't know, but we better ask them. It's no different with kids. Why are kids putting their heads on their desk? Why are they showing up late? Why are they skipping school? Why are they being disrespectful? Why are they off task? I don't know, but I bet there's a story there, because when they were 4 and 5 and they went to school, for the most part, they liked school. And now we've got kids who don't want to go to school. It's no different. And so part of it is to understand is this is why it's important that we're constantly taking a temperature check. We're investing in people. We're always knowing where people are at. And we give people grace, but we also have to give them support. We shouldn't judge them. We should believe people have good intentions. We should believe that people want to be their very best. But when they don't act their very best, there typically is a reason. And so people want to be in environments where they feel loved, valued, connected, appreciated, and feel like they can offer something to the community and the organization. We have to be more strategic. In other words, if we hire teachers this summer that are going into 2021, or we hired them last summer, why is it and how is it possible that 2, 3, 4 years later, these teachers have already lost their way? And what it tells me is because we as campus leaders are not putting in the right processes or the structures or the frameworks or the practices that allow these people to continue to get better. It's not them, it's us. It's not the kids, it's us. We tend to like to look outward in leadership, or any adults, we look outward to blame others when we don't get the results we want. And it's my opinions, the most effective leaders look inward. We know that we contributed to that. We may not know the answer, but we played a role in that. So I don't blame kids, I blame teachers. I don't blame teachers, I blame principals. I don't blame principals, I blame superintendents. We all play a role. We're all responsible for the culture and climate of the organization. So how do we create a culture then that we handle with care all of our people? That we recognize, hey, listen, how can we create a culture when people aren't living their core values? Rather than judge them, rather than label them, rather than punish them or evaluate them? What if we taught them? What if we coached them? What if we were more empathetic and compassionate, understand how they landed there? And what if everybody in the organization helped everybody get better? Because we have to recognize that no one can be great without the help of others. So how do we help others be better? How are we allowing others to help us be better? And how do we build a culture that when we aren't living our values, rather than get defensive, rather than get our feelings hurt, rather than walk away, rather than shut down, we say, you know what? Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. You know why? Because we've created a culture that I know Sarah wants me to be great, and I need Sarah's help to help me be great. So how do we give people permission to be great?
You know, one thing that struck me again after reading the Handle with Care book was so many of us are stuck in viewing grace as connected to weakness. If I'm kind to you, if I love you, and if I care for you, somehow that's a level of vulnerability and weakness that we are simply not going to go to, because this is work. And I think we need to shift that paradigm.
Right. And I'll be honest, I think we as leaders are responsible for shifting that paradigm with our teachers. And I believe our teachers are responsible for shifting that paradigm with our kids. Part of it is it's a different way of leading. You're right. We have to begin to reframe it for ourselves and understand we know this isn't working. This is not a good, effective practice. But part of it is my opinion again, is because we haven't made the connections. We don't know people well enough to understand where this is coming from. If we know kids are not successful, we know every kid that's successful is because adults are being their champion. They're invested in, they get to know their kids. They get to know on a personal level. They know them. Kids then trust them, just like it happened to us. Well, it's no different. So one of the things I tell principals all the time, Sarah, is look at your staff like your student body. They're no different. So if we're going to ask teachers to take care of our little ones, then we better take care of our teachers, right? It's no different. There are parallels in how we build a culture in an organization systemically, right? It isn't you do it, but I'm not going to do it. That's why Culturize, I talk about, which obviously Handle on Care, right, is Eyes on Culture series, right? He uses the same core principles to understand. Right. Core principle number 2 says expect excellence. What does that mean? Model the behaviors you want to see repeated. We know what we model is what we get, so we shouldn't be asking other people what we're not willing to do ourselves. That is ineffective leadership. You do it, Sarah, but I won't. No, we all do it, right? We're all part of living the core values. If we're not, then they're just words about words. Right. But we have to be more intentional.
Absolutely.
Because we can talk all day about, well, we got to get to those stories. I know, but then we say, but I don't have time.
We don't have time to invest in that. We hear teachers say that all the time in the classroom. I don't have time, Sarah, to do that kind of work because we have to get to the standards. Right. We can't get to the standards until we invest.
Watch what I tell people. You sure we don't have the time? Oh, you have the time. You're just using that time in a different way, because here's what happens. You have time when the kid has a meltdown. You have time when the kid is off task. You have time to take the kid out in the hallway and have a conversation with them. You have no idea how many minutes you're wasting in a day dealing with things on the back end because you didn't want to invest the time on the front end. By the way, it's a different kind of time, because here's the good news. The more we invest the time on the front end, by the way, that is the joy of the work. The joy of the work is making the connections. The joy of the work is hearing the stories and getting to know the kids and sitting down and listening to them and having you wrap their arms around them because they think, wow, right? Having a conversation on the back end when the kid's melting down and the kid's kicking or cursing at you, or having a back end conversation with a teacher who's not doing their job because you couldn't have a conversation on the front end, that is not fun. That is a conversation you're already having anxieties about. You're worried how it's going to go. You're asking other people different opinions. You've been thinking about it all day. You haven't been able to eat, sleep, or work because you're worried about this conversation because you didn't want to have the conversation over here on the front end. And people use that as an excuse. But here's the thing. I also think we allow them to use that as an excuse. How do we challenge people in positive ways without hurting our culture? And you know what it goes back to? The foundation of trust. And where does trust come from? Relationships. We don't want to invest time in it. You're going to pay for the price somewhere. You'll find the time, but that time is going to be exhausting. That's at least what I continue to work with right now. I'm seeing everywhere in buildings I'm having. But I give people grace in this sense, Sarah. If we knew how to do it better, we would do it better. No one wants to be ineffective. They just don't know what to do. Well, then you have a responsibility as a professional, as an adult, then to ask for help.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We got one final question for you, Jimmy. All All right. So so our membership is going to have access to all of the links to your excellent resources that you yourself have crafted, and so that will be posted with this podcast. But I want you to make a recommendation for our membership and for the folks who are listening in. Can you recommend one resource, and it could be your own, perhaps, but one resource that, you know what, if you can only pick one thing.
A really, really good mentor. No,
Ooh,
lots of things, right? I mean, obviously, I think I saw, if you're talking about podcasts, if you're talking about podcasts, I mean, I love listening to podcasts, right? Because it helps me reflect, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think Sarah Johnson has a great podcast on women leadership. I mean, what a great, inspiration, right? Women leaders, the power of that. And so if you haven't had a chance to listen to her podcast, Will Parker does a great job with his podcast for leadership, right? There's a couple of them. If you're looking at books right now, I mean, sometimes I go outside of education. I love the book of the 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz, right?
Really great piece.
Right. Why? Because he's talking about 4 tenets. Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly that was an influence on me. It's not a coincidence that we're talking about 4 core principles of Culturize. Those things inspired me as a young educator, right? So I think that's a powerful book. I think any book anymore right now, any resource that's on equity or social justice or any of those types of things are powerful. We should be reading on that. But more important, we should be reaching out and having conversations with people who live that every day. That's why I said kind of a mentor, but it's someone to reach out and have conversations. The bottom line is this: just continue to be a learner, continue to evolve. Never think that you have this job figured out, because none of us do, and you never will. We are in the teaching and learning profession. If we're going to influence, and if we're going to transform leadership, or if we're going to transform education, or if we're going to transform learning, well, then we better transform this first. In other words, you got to believe it, people. And if we don't believe things can be better, then what the hell are we all doing here?